My areas of expertise were employment, education and training systems, welfare policies, but since 10 years ago, roughly, I've started focusing much more on youth unemployment, school-to-work transitions, and associated policies. I'm also focusing more on not only on policy analysis and research into the policies themselves, but also on the evaluation of the effectiveness and labour market outcomes of such policies. The whole style is about comparing and contrasting youth and school-to-work transition regimes, youth labour market performance, effectiveness, and also challenges. So our role was to provide the broad picture of what's going on across Europe in terms of how youth labour markets have performed, especially since the crisis. And not surprisingly, they perform. There's massive variations in the way they perform. Then we try to link this to an existing and well-tested school-to-work transitions framework, which is the Paul and Walter framework that has been used across style. And what we found is that this model was developed in mid-2000. And although some of its assumptions about the models that exist, for example, the German model is based on dual training, apprenticeship model. The Scandinavian model is about supportive activation and focus on education. Some of their assumptions, the assumptions of the framework still hold, but what we found is after the crisis, it's in a state of flux. So things are changing. The problem is at the moment, it's too early to tell whether where the new equilibrium will be. What I think we can see, the trend, is that the quality of employment and the prospects for a lot of young people, I don't personally see them becoming better than before. So I'm afraid that the new equilibrium, especially for certain groups of young people, low-skilled, of migrant background, whom we know have difficulty accessing the labour market, the equilibrium, if we reach it, it will be lower than before. Not in every country, not in every regime, but the theme that comes very strongly from the data. So there is increased flexibility, because the idea is if you make flexible labour markets, employers will be less hesitant to hire people, young people in particular. But what we see is that the increased flexibility haven't been accompanied with a better employment conditions after even the initial temporary employment phase. So a lot of young people now across Europe are in an indeterminate series of internships, which are unpaid or very poor conditions. Even if they get a job, like in the UK, there are 38% of those on 0-hour contracts, which means they can't guarantee a number, when they're going to work, are young people. So even when they're in temporary employment, this becomes increasingly precarious. And the transition rate of temporary employment to permanent employment in terms of contracts is actually decreasing, even in so-called good regimes, like in the Netherlands. It was about 50% in the 90s, and now it's gone down to about 20%. So if this happens in supposedly good transition regimes, there is definitely an attempt to make labour markets more flexible. At one level, this is good because it's supposed to reduce the dualism in the labour market, which is a typical characteristic of youth labour markets, where young people are overrepresented in temporary employment. This is good as far as in the past they would move into permanent employment. What we see now is increasingly they stay in that state of precarious employment. So instead of being a stepping stone, it's actually a state of being. So I think the flexicurity, especially the way it's been implemented, because in every country it means different thing, it's definitely more flexibility and less security, and that's not the concept of flexicurity. I may make a pessimistic assessment, but I'm always an optimist. I think even the focus that the Youth Guarantee brought on young people, they put it on the agenda, especially on disadvantaged young people, needs. I mean, irrespective of how effective the policies is, the fact that they are up there in the political agenda in countries that in the past, not in every country, has a high visibility. I think it's a positive thing. I think it's a positive thing that at least thinks about youth unemployment. The precarious nature of employment, internships, is being much more openly discussed. And I can see, like, the Commission introduced the quality framework for traineeship. Even if it's not, people do not comply with it, the fact that it was felt, the need for introducing a framework, I can see the roots of some positive developments. I'm concerned that in terms of, we are also focusing too much on supply side, and I don't see a lot about the demand. And there is so much you can go with supply side policies, you need demand. And I think that is a bigger issue. That affects even adults, so at least Europe should have a much more balanced approach instead of focusing on supply side policies for young people.